folks who went before us blazed the trail through history. The heritage they left behind is part of you and me. All the dreams they still live on, and it makes me proud to be a living, breathing part of it all, the American legacy.
These are yearling heifers, most of them 18 months old. They go to make up part of a pretty good-sized herd of beef cattle, raised for one main purpose: to provide meat for you and me and the rest of America. Over many generations, these animals have been specially bred to adapt to the dry conditions here on the Great Plains, to grow and fatten up on these short grasses, to produce less milk and more meat than their cousins, the dairy cattle. Here in eastern New Mexico and parts of nearby Texas, ranches extend for miles and miles in all directions in order to provide the 35 to 40 acres of grazing land necessary for each cow or steer to grow on. With such a dry climate, it's little wonder that this region became cattle country. And yet there was a time when there wasn't a cow or a steer to be seen any place. A time when the Indians here in the Southwest were startled to see strangely dressed white men riding on the backs of these four-legged creatures that the Indians had never seen before. The year was 1540. His name was Francisco Vasquez de Coronado, captain and leader of the first large Spanish expedition sent north from Mexico to explore the lands that eventually became the southwest part of our country. Although Coronado and his men came seeking new sources of gold, they found only a very dry, desert-like region, inhabited by Indians who lived in villages, which the Spanish later named pueblos. The members of the expedition did, however, explore, map, and claim for their Spanish king a vast area of our Southwest. They also brought the first horses, cattle, and sheep into this region. Such animals were to provide the beginnings of the great herds of livestock that we have today. It's called a carreta. It might well be called America's first moving van. It was pulled by oxen over the long 1,500-mile trail north from central Mexico. It carried everything that the Hispanic settlers believed they would need to start a new way of life here in the Southwest. And what couldn't be carried in the carreta was carried up here. The ideas, the knowledge, the experience to rebuild what they had left far behind in Spain and Mexico. For over 200 years, small groups of Hispanic settlers slowly trickled northward, establishing forts and missions, villages and towns, ranches of enormous size. Here, close to Santa Fe, was built one of the earliest ranchos, Las Golondrinas, fortress-like adobe walls, living quarters opening to a large central plaza, complete with outdoor ovens and well water for drinking. Here there are memories of early morning Catholic Mass, of homespun cloth and tanned leather, of shouts and laughter from rancheros who had spent long hours in the saddle, making sure there would be continuing profits from raising large herds of cattle and sheep.
Las Golondrinas is an old Spanish rancho which was acquired by the Vega y Coca family by a royal purchase from the King of Spain in the 17th century. Today, many of the buildings and furnishings have been restored to appear as they once were, so that people, young and old, can experience part of the legacy of those early Hispanic settlers.
Such grants of land and royal purchases were important to the region, not only to Hispanic settlers, but to Anglo-Americans as well. Men like Stephen Austin, who in 1821 received a large grant of land from the newly formed Mexican government. The land itself was located in the Mexican territory, west and south from what was then the United States. Within 15 years of the first settlement, some 20,000 Americans had joined Austin and his followers deep in Mexican territory. These independent-minded farmers and ranchers who called themselves Texans, had long protested that Mexican laws were restricting their individual rights and freedoms under the land grant. There was even serious talk about taking up arms in defense of such liberties. By 1836, events had led to armed rebellion. At the Alamo Mission in the village of San Antonio, several hundred men, women, and children were trapped and fighting for their lives against General Santa Anna and his Mexican army. At the town Washington on the Brazos, there was a cry for declaring independence from Mexican authority.
Jose Navarro.
Ah, Senor Ellis. How good it is to see you again, mi amigo.
I was hoping you'd be coming to the convention. We'll be meeting this afternoon at Noah Byers' gunsmith shop. Can you be there?
See, I plan to attend. Will my friend Stephen Austin be there?
No, he's still back in the United States trying to raise money for our cause. Our supplies are running dangerously low. By the way, what news do you hear about Travis and his men at the Alamo?
Not good, senor. A neighbor of mine, acting as a Mexican courier, was able to pass unnoticed through their troop encampment area. He said he saw from a distance what must have been a force of 3,000 of General Santa Anna's troops completely encircled around the old mission. Felipe said there was no way now to get help to our defenders.
3,000 troops against less than 200 men. Those are terrible odds, Jose.
Indeed they are, senor. It's a miracle they have been able to hold out this long. I feel helpless not being able to do anything.
Don't chide yourself, Jose. Tomorrow at the convention, we are going to do something. George Childress is going to introduce the resolution that will declare our independence from Mexico. It'll be a day for all of us to remember, including Santa Anna and his Mexican troops. We'll need your signature on the resolution.
I would be honored, Ricardo. I may have been born a Mexican, but you know well that my loyalties are on the side of the new republic. There are many Mexicans like myself who have lived and worked next to you Americanos these long years. What you ask for is right. We want the same rights and privileges as you.
Texans owe you a great deal, Jose Navarro.
Your words are kind. I will see you in town, amigo. Adios.
Adios.
March 2nd, 1836. Washington on the Brazos, Noah Byers' gunsmith shop. The birth of a new country, the Republic of Texas. March 6, 1836, San Antonio. The fall of the Alamo to General Santa Anna's troops. The only survivors, several women and children. April 21st, 1836, San Jacinto. With the cry, "Remember the Alamo," Sam Houston and his band of Texans destroy Santa Anna's advance guard and capture the Mexican general. Independence is guaranteed. December 29th, 1845, Washington, D.C. Texas joins the United States of America as the 28th state. In the years that followed independence and statehood, more and more settlers moved into frontier towns to begin a new way of life. Many of them took advantage of the seemingly never-ending grasslands available to begin raising the great herds of Texas cattle. They're called just what their horns suggest. These, of course, are distant relatives to the great herds of Texas longhorns that during the time this land was being settled by men like Stephen Austin and Jose Navarro, this animal was becoming a breed unto itself. It adapted well to such country. In 1865, longhorn cattle could be bought in Texas for $3 to $4 a head, meaning simply that each cow or heifer was worth somewhere between $3 and $4. The same longhorns could be sold in eastern markets of the United States for 10 times that much money, if only a way could be found to get them there. The only possible way was to walk the cattle to market, at least walk them to the nearest railhead, where they could be loaded into rail cars and shipped east to markets that would buy the beef.
All right, head them up and move them out.
Thus, in the middle 1860s, began the great Texas cattle drives, walking cattle northward once each year to the growing railroad cow towns of Abilene, Ellsworth, Hayes, and Dodge City. These were journeys of 1,500 to 2,000 miles that took 2 to 4 months to complete.
Hank, I want you to go on up and ride point this morning. Tell Roddy to come back and get some breakfast. We're near an Indian country, so be on the lookout for the Chickasaw.
First, you needed a trail boss who knew how to take charge of men, equipment, and a herd of cows numbering perhaps 2,000 to 3,000 head. You needed one experienced cowboy for every 200 head of cattle, and each one of these cowboys needed extra horses to take with him. A man called a wrangler had the job of keeping together the spare horses.
What do you have simmering for us today, Cookie? Hopefully it's better than those miserable beans you gave us last night.
You'll eat the grub I fix, or you won't eat at all, cowboy.
Cowboy, a name that we now attach to that group of Americans who left us a great legacy in the early West. During the 20-some years of the Texas cattle drives, cowboys numbered in the tens of thousands. One of every three was either black or Hispanic. A cowboy's life was lonely, often dull, with plenty of hard, sweaty work in the summer, with cold, uninteresting chores in the winter. Most of his working hours were spent in the saddle, displaying his skills with his horse and rope, herding and branding cattle. And despite what you see on television or in the movies, rarely did he use or even need a gun. Strangely enough, it was this invention which helped change the cowboy's way of life in the early West. In 1874, the first piece of barbed wire was sold in the United States. It offered farmers who had come west to settle a cheap way of keeping cattle off their newly acquired land. It also made ranchers and cowboys realize that the days of the open range, the cattle drives, would soon disappear. Today, almost all ranch land is fenced, with only a few herds of longhorns remaining. In their place are many different breeds of cattle, raised to produce per pound as much meat as possible. And yet, for many heifers and steers, grass isn't enough. Here on the Carter Ranch, 3 times each week, the cattle diet is enriched with a special food supplement. The reason? To help these heifers put on more weight.
Mobile 2 is Mobile 6. I'm over in the pasture east of the house, but I don't see any cattle yet. Do you see any?
Yeah, Mobile 6, I found some over here in the horse pasture on the road up the feeder.
Well, just stay with them, and I'll be over there in a minute, and we'll feed them.
Okay, I'll keep an eye on them.
10-4, thank you.
In a year's time, when these yearlings weigh as much as 700 to 750 pounds, it's time to round up cattle and sell them, usually to one feedlot buyer located in the region.
We've got 350 yearling heifers here ready to ship to the feed yards tomorrow. We're hoping that they've gained enough over the last 11 months on our grasslands here to offset our year's expenses. Sometimes we operate on such a narrow margin that a 20-pound extra gain can mean the difference between a profit or a loss.
Even before the sun comes up, roundup riders are in the saddles, moving out on the range to drive the cattle back to the corrals, onto the weighing scales, and into the waiting trucks. It doesn't take long when neighboring friends are here to help you out. And then come the anxious moments when a few pounds difference on the weighing scales can mean either profit or loss for the entire year. This time, their weight is up, the owners are happy, the year's work shows profit. Not much time to relax, though. Another 300 calves are already on the range, waiting for their feeding time. Will next year be a good one? Only time will tell. What with possible winter storm loss, the lack of spring moisture, and the up and down market price for beef. But then, those are the chances that all ranchers have to be willing to risk here in cattle country.